of Hub Culture here at Davos 2023. Really pleased to be partnering in the Hub Culture studio with Handshake, and I'm delighted to be here with my two venerable guests. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
So we've got James Slezak, CEO of Swayable, as well as Michael Posner, Professor of Ethics and Finance, and the Director of the Center for Business and Human Rights at NYU Stern School of Business. So, the theme of the World Economic Forum this year is collaboration in a fragmented world. Now, the internet has a role to play in that. How does that theme sit with you in the work that you do?
Well, the internet is both a tool to bring us together, to break down that fragmentation, but it's also potentially a risk. It is a risk. And I think part of what we need to do is figure out how internet companies or technology companies can work better both with governments and with civil society and make sure that they reduce those risks and amplify the places where technology can bring us together.
I mean, the great promise of the internet was that there was this incredible democratizing tool. It was going to bring everyone in the world together. We were going to be able to solve problems together. Truth would be shared. And it hasn't really felt like that. I mean, part of it has, right? But part of it hasn't.
Yeah, 10 years ago, I was in the State Department and was there during the Arab Spring, and we saw the power of the internet to bring people together, to allow movements to grow. But we now have seen so many places where bad actors, the no-goodniks of the world, have used technology basically to divide us and make for a more fragmented world. They didn't create the fragmentation, but technology and its misuse is amplifying it.
Well, let's name some names here. Let's get real. And James, we'll bring you into this as well. So if we think about the last few years, and disinformation on the internet has become an enormous theme. We had the disinformation during the elections, during COVID-19. Now we have examples of what's happening at Twitter. How do you, as a CEO of a company that deals with information on the internet, how do you approach this issue?
Yeah, well, I think we were naive about the promise of social media, and technology makes things easier, but it also makes it easier to do bad things. And I think we're starting to see now that the democratizing forces that were part of the good you can get from the internet. I think now bad actors are fragmenting, where fragmentation is a political strategy for some people. So yeah, I mean it's been unfortunate to see that. I think it's been more unfortunate, I think, to see that there's been some slowness in the realization among some of the leaders in the technology world, and I would say Elon Musk running Twitter has sort of demonstrated for us through a sort of a series of pratfalls, that the problem is not so easy. That building a healthy community requires something a little bit more than a very simplistic view that a platform just is for everybody and you say whatever you like. Our view as Swayable is you've got to start with a set of clear values.
Like what? What are your clear values?
Well, our values are firstly truth, secondly social justice, so we're unapologetic about that. We're on the side of people that want to make the world a fairer place, and people can call that the woke mind virus if they like. We just think that it's part of who we are, it's why we built the tech, and it's part of why we work with the people we work with. And so I think if you put that forward, then now you can make decisions more transparently and clearly about what's in and what's out.
We spoke a little bit about Twitter and Elon Musk. What else would you add to that list of the things that are worrying you now about disinformation on the internet?
Well, I think we have still a set of big companies running social media platforms, whether it's Meta or Google, YouTube or Twitter or TikTok, that are basically operating on a business model that maximizes viewership. They want to maximize eyeballs so they can get advertising. And they've undervalued the importance of moderating content in a responsible way. It's core to what they do as businesses. And they started out from the premise, we're kind of like the phone companies. We run pipes, people run stuff through them. We're not moderators or arbiters of the truth. They're not the New York Times, but they're not the phone company. There's something in between. And we're still at a place where the companies haven't accepted responsibility for this enormous power they have as the overseers of these platforms that we all use every day, multiple times, and where a lot of people are getting their news and information.
I mean, TikTok is an interesting one because obviously I'm not sure if you guys are on TikTok, but
I'm addicted to it. I've never made one though.
certainly everybody in my family under the age of 25 is on TikTok and
Yeah.
gets a lot of their information from it, as well as, I will say, BBC News website, which is all right. And whenever I send them New York Times articles, they do occasionally click on
Good.
them.
I hope they subscribe.
I subscribe. But I wonder if we just stop on TikTok for a moment, owned by a Chinese company, how does that sit with you in terms of an arbitrator of truth and of information spreading?
Well, not well, and I think increasingly we're seeing ByteDance, the Chinese company, grab more control of TikTok and the way they're moderating content. I think in the last year, TikTok has tried to demonstrate that they're really an independent company. They've set up systems in the United States to basically be better content moderators. Now that's being dissipated, and ByteDance, under the influence of the Chinese government, is taking that back. So I am very concerned about where TikTok is heading.
From your experience at the New York Times, how did you approach this, this idea of truth on the internet, and how do you deal with shades of gray?
Yeah. Well, look, I think one point is to realize we're all fallible. So none of us, is the Pope here. And I think, owning up when you get something wrong and realizing there's a range, a shade of opinions in the old Sulzberger quote. But I think that the second way is also saying that there's got to be lines. At some point you have to say no. And I think, the New York Times said no to shaping its coverage to allow it to maintain access to markets like the Chinese market, where it's been banned for a long time because of its reporting on the kinds of abuses that happen in any large country. So I think companies have to be prepared to say no. You've got to leave money on the table, because if you're not, well, you don't have ethics.
There seems to be a reluctance, especially in the United States, to regulate these companies, and we can, see them here on the promenade. We've got Meta over there. We've got Palantir across the road. Why is that? Why can't we see more regulation?
Well, we have something in the U.S. called the First Amendment, which says that government can't regulate content of speech. So that's a big impediment. On the other hand, government can oversee, in a broader sense, an industry. Every important industry in the United States has some government entity that's basically watching what they do. The airlines, the drug companies, the financial industry. We need that for social media. And we need to have it done in a smart way that doesn't, again, get in the way of the First Amendment and free speech, but says to companies greater transparency, greater accountability, a more serious way to regulate content so that your platforms are really promoting the truth and the things that we as a society need.
Yeah, no, I would add, I hope that a healthier market structure helps with some of these problems. I think there is no good answer when one company controls a vast proportion of all communication that happens in a country. That private entity has too much power, and I think the United States was founded on principles that looked at dividing power up and having checks and balances. And I think economic and industry policy has to represent that to some extent. There is some amount of bigness that's too much, and I think that's also going to help if we can solve it.
What about the pure amount of information that comes through these companies? I remember when there was all the misinformation coming through about treatment in Burma, for example, of minorities, and the fact that Facebook or Meta at the time was saying that they didn't have enough people who spoke those languages and who were available to be content moderators. True? Bit of a wishy-washy answer?
Well, I was actually very involved in that at the time in 2014. At that point, they didn't have anybody who spoke Burmese.
Right.
It wasn't just that they didn't have enough, they didn't have anybody.
Right.
And the world is, 190 countries, there are hundreds of languages. Meta, Facebook is in all of those places. They need to have people in the country who speak the language. It's an investment, but it's core to their business. They can't treat it as something to be outsourced. They can't outsource responsibility for content moderation. It's part of who they are.
Anything to add on that point?
Yeah, globalization's always hard. That was my job at the Times, and there's a lot of different nations and countries and cultures and practices, but that's what you got to get your head around if you're going to do business in places. And I think the Wild West view of the internet, where you kind of stick a web page up and people do what they want and hopefully give you their credit card numbers, I think the days are pretty numbered on that approach.
I mean, I'm interested, if we go back to Twitter in terms of when the content moderators got fired. I mean, it was surprising, right? Because it's not like the content moderators were taking away truth. They were just making it a slightly less horrific place to be. And Twitter, at the best of times, can be shocking, depending on what kind of opinions you're putting up there.
Amazing. Well, it's like an opera. I mean, Musk took it over saying that this is he's going to allow all speech that's legal. And I mean, he had ownership for a few days before he was banning a aircraft tracking site and kicking off journalists that had covered his companies. They still haven't been let on. He'll only let them back on if they renounce tweets that violated no terms of service. You would make the terms of service change up the next day after kicking people off. So I mean, this sort of operatic kind of comedy of just sort of showing people how a nuanced approach to understanding a spectrum of speech and a healthy community is not as simple as the folks in his orbit have been shouting it is for so long.
And if you look at Twitter, any of these companies we're talking about, they're basically advertising companies. That's the way they make money. And I think you've seen advertisers highly anxious about what's happening at Twitter, and that's going to affect the bottom line.
So a lot of discussion about 2023 may see the emergence of a new social media company that does treat speech in a fair way, that does value truth. If you were going to help to design this company, what would the underlying values be for it?
Well, I think it's some of the things you were talking about. Be honest, be committed to the truth, have a sense of what's right and wrong in the world, and be careful and be transparent, and recognize the fact that this is a public trust, these social media platforms, and you have to treat it as such and do what's best for the society as a whole.
And I might say, look, not everything has to be a company. I grew up in Australia. We have public broadcasting. The BBC does a great job, and most of the internet started as a set of open protocols. And you listen to folks like the founders of Twitter, and really where their head goes now is like, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe centralizing this in one large corporate structure with sort of anonymized shareholders demanding more and more returns, no matter how large it is. Maybe that's okay for some kinds of problems, but not something that's as important as the means of communicating in a democracy.
Interesting. Well, I'd like to go on all day, but we might have to continue this conversation next year, in fact. So to James and Michael, thank you so much for stopping by the studio here, Davos 2023, and I'm Edie Lush.